Hello everyone. There's a couple of things I want to go over as we finalize this last project in publication design class. So it's going to be kind of a wide range of topics, and I'm just going to kind of briefly go over them. So feel free to stop and rewind and go back and look at stuff in detail and practice along with what I'm saying. So I just have a sample file open right now. It's going to be this 8-page corporate brochure that we're working on. And a couple of things. First of all, I noticed there's no bleed on this file. So obviously when I set this up originally, I forgot to tell it I wanted a bleed. So if you find yourself in that situation, all you have to do is go under your document setup. And a lot of times when you're first making your file, this is what it'll look like. And that's why sometimes people overlook the bleed. You just need to open it up, and then you'll see the bleed settings. As always, I go with 1/8 of an inch. That's my default. And now you'll see I have this red line around my page. That's my bleed. So if I have images like this that I need to make sure I take them all the way to the bleed line if I'm going to extend them off the page. Another thing I want to talk about is, to hide your guides, you hit Command semicolon. And you can just toggle back and forth between that as you're designing. But even when I hide my guides, I still see these frame edges. That's something that I don't like to look at. So usually when I open a file, one of the first things I do is I go under View, and then I say Hide Frame Edges under Extras. That just gets rid of them. So if I toggle between my guides, I see that, but I don't see those guides. Now, if I go over a photo or a text box or something, you'll see the guides do appear. So I can still see where they are. It's just I don't see them all the time. Another thing I wanted to talk about briefly is picking out colors. So we talked about this before, but InDesign, yours might look like this over here, this eyedropper tool. But if you right click on it, you can see there's also this color theme tool, which is a nice little feature. If you have a photo or dominant photo or predominant photo that you have, and you want to kind of build your color palette from that, use this tool, click on your photo, and you'll notice it gives you some suggestions. And if you click on this little triangle button, you'll see there are more options here. So dark, bright, deep. And let's just say this is one I'm interested in because I do like the idea of having a beige, like a very neutral color. I don't need black, so I'm just going to go with this muted version right here. So here's a color palette, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to add this to my swatches palette. So I can click on the button right here and it says add this theme to swatches. Now when I go over here to my swatches palette, there is that muted theme with those photos, those colors that I just picked. So what I might want to do in this case is show my guides, draw a box at the bottom of the page, maybe fill it with this beige color and really lighten up the tint, and then send it to the back. And that would be Object, Arrange, Send to Back. So if I hide my guides, oops, wrong button, you'll see, well, maybe that's a little too light, so I can darken it up. So you have all kinds of options when it comes to stuff like that. So those are two of the things I want to talk to you about. Another one, notice how my logo, I placed it earlier, and notice how it looks really jagged. Zoom in, you'll see. InDesign does that on purpose because it takes energy and processing speed for your computer to always render the artwork properly. So what InDesign does is it kind of gives you a sampling of what's there without really going into showing you the details. That's what's happening with this logo. Because if I click on the photo, go to my links, I see that yes, it is right there. Actually, it says it doesn't know where it is. So I will relink it. I'll just say relink. It's going to say, what do you want to relink? It tells me exactly what I'm looking for up here, this Homestead logo. I actually know that it's in my projects, inbox, projects for pictures, Homestead logo. But still, it's there. There are no issues, but it still looks pretty bad. Well, if I really want to override just this default, just so I can see, if you right click on a photo, there's this display for performance toward the bottom, and see how it's set for typical display. If I change it to high quality, it's going to clear up and I'll see it. Now keep in mind, it's the same thing with images, the photos you use. Keep in mind, if you do this, it's going to slow down your processor. If you don't have a very fast computer, you might not want to do that. So, but it does give you a peace of mind at least that there's something there that is high res. All right. Also notice I have 3 errors down here at the bottom of my screen. And if I go to my links, they're the 3 errors right there. So what I have is I have some images. What image is that? I can just say go to image and it shows me. So obviously I've pulled this off the internet, I've linked it, but now my computer has lost it. So I will just need to make sure and go back and relink that photo so that I know exactly where it is. To relink it, you just click on this button right here. This says go to link. Oh, sorry, this one. It says relink. You click on it and then it tells you what's the name of the photo you're looking for. So go over here, type that in, and then say open, and it's going to relink your file. All right, so now I want to go and talk a little bit about style sheets. So hopefully you've worked on style sheets now and you understand how to add and how to make sure everything is properly aligned and applied to a style sheet. So typically, as always, we're using our paragraph styles. We're not using character styles much at all. And there is a nice feature here in your paragraph styles. If you click on this style override highlighter, it will let you know if your style sheet has been set up improperly. So let's say I decided I wanted my headings, main heading, instead of that being this color, I might want it to be this blue color. Notice what happened. It's highlighted in this greenish color. And the reason it's doing that, let me go back to my paragraph, is because I have this turned on. And it's showing me, if I turn it off, it disappears. It shows me, hey, something's wrong with this style sheet. And sure enough, if I click on the type, it's got a plus by it. Well, what is it? It means I changed the color of the text. And so now it's InDesign's telling me, hey, that style sheet isn't set up properly anymore. Something's changed about it. If I know this is what I want, I do want it to be this blue color. I can right click on this and I can say, actually I'll do it over here instead. I'm going to go right up here and I'm just going to say redefine style right here. And what redefine style does is it goes into my style sheet, goes to the color character, and it changes it here. So instead of me having to do it, it says, okay, whatever I had here is what I really want to change it to. Now if I go back to this style override highlighter and turn it on, it's not showing me that error anymore. So this is a nice tool to decide and show if you have your style sheet set up properly and throughout. Another thing I might suggest on when you're having subheads, see how this is a really long line and a short line. This is a really long line and a short line. Typically with subheads and headlines, I don't like that look. So one of the suggestions I might have is to open up your style sheet, and if you go to indents and spacing, you can turn on this balance ragged lines. And if I show you the preview, that's what it was. This is what it happens if I were to use it. And it just tries to make your line links similar. Now you might not like that look. If you don't, what you can do is just manually bring one of your words or so down. So you can click here, and instead of hitting return, I don't want to hit return because notice how in my type paragraph style I have the space before. So by hitting return, it also adds the space before. I don't want that. But if I hold down a shift and hit return, that's called a soft return. It does take it to the next line without adding any of the indent spacing that I have in my style sheet. So I might do that on these two, at least so that it's not such a big difference. Another thing I would want you to make sure you do is when you have a subhead like this, you want to make sure in your keep options I would always want to say, yeah, I want to keep all the lines in this subhead together. That means it would never say, why is homestead inspection on this bottom line, and then the next line on the next page would say qualified to perform. So it's going to make sure this is always stuck together. And when it comes to subheads, I also want to make sure that this is always with the next one line. So I would go up here and say keep with next one line. Now this is for a subhead or a headline. You'd want to do that. When it comes to your body copy, there's a couple of things you might want to do with your keep options. You definitely don't want to say keep all lines together, because many times when I click that on, you can see this all disappears. Because this right here could not, the whole paragraph didn't fit. But you might want to say, see how this has got one line of type with my body copy? I might say, I always want to have at least two. So you can say keep all lines together, and then right here you would say at the start and end of the paragraph have at least two lines together. And it did force it to go to the next page because it didn't want one line to be by itself. So that's typically something I might do. But you don't necessarily want to do the keep with next anything or keep with previous. That's probably not a good idea for your body copy. Okay. Also, make sure always you go to your style sheet and you make sure your hyphenation is turned off. All right. Now, when it comes to design, do I want 3 photos on this page, this spread? Probably not. And I also want to make sure that my 3 photos, the photos I use at least, there's some contrast. There's one dominant photo, and then there's a smaller photo. So one of my suggestions for this piece is don't have too many photos, and make sure if you do have photos that you do have contrast within them. So I'm going to get rid of this photo right here for now, just scoot it off to the side. And instead of having these 2 boxes, they do align to my grid. I'm just going to move them, and I'm going to have this opening paragraph span my pages. So that's what this paragraph style is, this introductory paragraph. But notice I need some sort of a break here, right? To let the reader know there's a different paragraph starting. The only reason I know that now is because we have this gap, this space right here, but sometimes you might not have that. So in my introduction paragraph style sheet, I need to make sure under indents and spacing that I at least put space after, which I will do. That way we know this is a new paragraph. And then I'm going to go ahead and make this, I'm going to switch it out. Make this photo be my larger photo, and I'm going to go all the way to this is the where the page will fold in half, and I'm going to make it go all the way to the outside bleed, and I'm going to scoot it up. Okay. Sometimes you can't really get to the top because you pushed something so far off. Luckily I can still grab it here, and I'll just crop it down to my new style. My new bleed, something like that. Then I have text on top of a photo. That doesn't work. Typically I always like to bring my type to the front, but sometimes your type might be in the back and then it just kind of disappears. It's behind the photo. Well, that's where we want to make sure we're using our text wrap. So to turn text wrap on, just click on your photo that's on top, click over here on text wrap and just say, yes, I want to wrap around the bounding box. And that's all you have to do. Now notice it goes right up to the photo. I usually, you always want to have some sort of a break or some sort of a gap. Typically I go with 1/8 of an inch because that's my standard, between my gutter right here. So standard, it would be 1/8 of an inch. You might want more, you might want less. Right now it's doing it on all 4 sides. That's default, but you can turn this off and just do it on the side or sides that you like. Now by doing this, my opening type is kind of pushed too far over. So I would want to go back to my paragraph, introductory paragraph, maybe reduce it a little bit smaller, and maybe instead of being light, I might want to do semi-bold or something like that. And I also might want to change the color to one of my other colors that were part of my color palette. I don't know. I can always come back and change that later. All right. So it's looking better, but I still have more type behind my photo. So I'll just go back to text wrap, turn on the text wrap, make sure it's at least 1/8 of an inch. And then I have 2 photos now on this spread. They're both at the top. Probably don't need that. I'd probably rather have this photo go toward the bottom, and then just make sure I bring my text box up. Now I do have a top margin, a bottom margin on every page. This margin is really for our text. We need to keep our text within this space. Doesn't mean I have to always put my type at the top. I can, and often we do, but for some reason I might want to bring it down, and I have my ruler over here that lets me know how far down I have it. So this would be 1 inch. And if you click on your text box, you also have your XY coordinates up here that tell you that this is a 1/2 inch from the middle spine, and it's 1 inch from the top. So that might be something I decide to do. Instead of always starting up here at a 1/2 inch, I'm going to start all of my text 1 inch down. I just want to be consistent if I do that. So then I have this photo. I might want to make it just a little bit taller, and then make it taller to go up. Now this is a very common thing to do, is you grab your photo and you make it bigger, but what I'm really doing is I'm squishing it, or I'm stretching it. I'm not increasing it in proportion. And the reason I know that is right up here. I had this in a previous video that we've talked about, but this tells me my percentages left to right and up and down. And by enlarging this photo, I got it out of proportion. So always check your photos. What I typically do is I find the larger number and I bump it up just 1 point, and then I can crop it within this shape, this space, any way I'd like. You can always bump it up even more. Oh, I got to make sure this is on so they go together. But you can always re-crop it within your box if you don't like the way it looks. All right, and let's see, one other thing I might do is, let me just show you that redefine style again. So let's say I just want to play around with this, the colors, and see what colors I like. So that's what a beige would look like. This is what the blue would look like. And then let's try the maroon. So, which one do I think I'd like? I think I might go with this one. So I could go back to my paragraph style. Sure, notice how it has a plus by it. It has that because all of these are a different color. But if that's the one I'd like, I right click on it and say redefine style. Then I go down to this one. It's got a plus on it because I did change the color. So on this one I want to say no, make it what the style sheet should be. And by that you click on this clear overrides. And the same thing with this. Now if I don't do this, if I don't clear the override, and I turn on my style override highlighter, it's going to highlight this one, right? Because that one is different. It doesn't have the blue. It has the maroon, which I manually did. So by overriding it and making it say clear override, then it goes back to the way it should be, which is the blue. and it no longer is highlighted because there's nothing wrong with it. All right, so moving on, I want to talk about this. So we have this space right here. And I have a style sheet called bullets, but I want to actually make them bullets. So instead of, putting an option 8, which is a bullet, and typing it in manually, I want to have the style sheet from the paragraph styles do it. One of the options here is bullets. And I can just say, yeah, I want to have these bullets. And notice the default is really half an inch over. That's more than I would ever want to do. Remember the whole design principle of proximity? You want to make sure this bullet is close enough to the text that you realize those two go together. So maybe 1/8 of an inch. Again, that's the number I use on a lot of stuff. And that's how you make bullets. Now there are ways that you can do special bullets. You can create your own by adding. And then you can also change it to numbering, and it'd be 1, 2, 3. But in this case, I do want to do bullets. But I sure don't like all this space right here. So there's an option. We have these columns. Right now, I'm just using one column because this is a small page size. It's only 5.5 inches wide. Sometimes we have our text will be in a couple of columns, 2 columns or 3 columns. And, we've talked about how you can span text over columns. Well, in a situation like this where I'm not really using columns in my text, there's also a thing called split. And even though it doesn't say it here, it just says span columns, there's also the ability to split. So by default, it's set for single column, meaning it's just going to be a normal text. Span, in this case, I can't because I only really have one column of type, but I can split it. And I can split it in 2, or I can split it in 3 or 4. I will probably do 3 because it'll be 3, 3, and 3. I might want to put a little bit of space, reduce the amount of space before, and maybe put in my own number. I might want to change those colors. I want to be consistent. I want to use the same color scheme. I don't want to just randomly pick new colors. So as long as I'm using the same color scheme, it should be okay. But that's what I wanted to show you about bullets and about the split. Now let's say I'm going to get rid of that. And we'll go back to single column. Let's say, and this one does not have a text strap on the photo, so I'll turn that on. Maybe I do have this set up for 2 columns of type. And right now you do it right here. So now I'm using 2 columns of type within this text box. I might reduce this photo so I can see it a little bit better. Now, instead of split column, let's say I want my headlines to go all the way across. There is a span all feature which takes the text all the way across. Okay, I'm going to undo that. In this case, let's say I had I had 2 columns of type. I probably wouldn't want to do the 3 column split because it's not going to show up. It's not. Some of these words are too big to fit on that column, but it probably will let me do 2. So if I were doing 2 columns worth of type, I could say split 2, and even though I don't have 3 columns, at least it's not going to have all that wasted space over here. So that's a nice look as well. So, and notice if I show my guides, because I have a 4 column grid, it is aligning to my grid by doing 2 columns. There's no reason for the bullets that I have to have bullets. I could just call it column to list. And when it comes to bullets, I can just say don't. And I could just have the words as well without the bullets. That's just a design preference of something you want it or not. One more thing I want to show you. I'm going to act like I have, let's say, this is Iowa old style, but let's say I have Times New Roman. Like this is one of the very first things I was doing, and we talk about we don't want to use Times New Roman because it's overused, and I have a hard time sleeping at night with people who use Times New Roman. But let's say you did use Times New Roman once and you forgot to get rid of it. Well, an easy solution would be click on this. It's going to show you, there's something wrong with that style. Another way to do it though is if you want to look at all the fonts you're using, and this is what I do when I'm grading your projects, I go to this Find Fonts and I see how many fonts you're using. So under Type Find Font, it'll tell you that I'm using this Iowan Old Style Black and Old Style Roman, which is normal, and then the Proxima Nova Bold, Bold Attack Light, and Semi-Bold. But then I'm also have Times New Roman used. And you're like, well, I wonder where that is. Where am I using it? You click on it and you say Find First, and it tells you, oh, that's where you're using it. So then I can just say, okay, well, this is supposed to be subheading without the, and you just override it. Another way you can do it, let's say my style sheet is Times New Roman. And it's not black, it's just Times New Roman regular. Okay. And I go back to my Find Fonts and I notice, ooh, there's Times New Roman, there's 2 of them. Well, one thing you can do is you can, from up here, you can say, I would rather that be Iowan Bold. So you can go and you can say, I want to replace it with Iowan Bold. And not only do I want to replace it with Iowan Bold, but I want to redefine my style. So the style sheet says that the subhead is Times New Roman. But by clicking on this, I'm going to override it and I'm going to change the style sheet to be this. And I'm going to do that. Say done. Now when I look at my subheading style sheet, it will have changed my font from Times New Roman to this Iowan Bold. So that's a nice little feature. That's a way to check and see how many fonts you're using. Remember, we want to use no more than 3, typically 2, a serif and a sans serif. I'm using a serif for my subheads and my headlines. I'm using my sans serif for the body copy. All right. One other thing I want to talk to you about is as you're moving stuff along, you're going to notice that you need, like, you might want type to go from this page to the next page. And by default, a lot of times people will, I'm going to get this back to one page. People will just hit return, 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 return. I don't want you to hit return, 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 return. I want you to know how you can force information to go from one page to the next. So let's say I know that I want commonly asked questions to be on the next page. Well, instead of hitting return, 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 it's going to go to the next page. I would like to do something. There's a key command that you can use. You can go where you want to go, and you just hit the enter key. Now the enter key on the keyboard is the far right key on the keyboards that have a number pad on it. If you have a smaller keyboard like on a laptop, you're going to have to hit the function key and then the return key. And it should have a little, some of them have the little enter above the return key, like the word enter, and grayed out or in a color or something like that. That tells you this is an optional key if you hold down the function key. But if I hit enter, it jumps. And it jumps up here to the top. That's the way you want to do it. The only problem you might run into is I'm going to show you, this is how you can say show invisibles. And it tells you where, like what a space is, what something like all that kind of good stuff is. This is the paragraph return. This is that, you know. This right here is a paragraph return. That's the character for the jump. So what might happen though is, let's say I increase the size of this photo. And I go, oh, I want it a little bit bigger. I want a little bit bigger. I'm going to have it go about this high. and I'll increase this, something like that. Great. Now I go to the next page. This text box is empty. The reason this text box is empty, it's got that character right here at the very top, just by itself. And I'm going to act like, instead of having two text boxes here, I'm just going to have one text box here. So this whole text box is going to look like there's nothing on the page. Well, there is nothing on the page, and the reason is I have this character right here, which is the jump to next column. Or it's jump to next column, or if you don't use columns, it's jump to next page. So if I just select it and say get rid of it, and delete, then you see that my type moves in, and it's more like what it should be. But if I were to shorten this text box, there it is again. So I would just go here and say enter, and it jumps it over. All right, so hopefully this has helped and figured a few things out. We talked about style sheets. We talked about color themes. Make sure you have your bleeds. Turn off your hyphenation. Always do pretzel find. Period, space, space. Replace it with period, space. Document. Always. Get rid of all those double spaces after periods. So keep up the good work. I'm going to sign out for now. But as always, let me know if you have any questions.